Welcome to plenary session 1 on 2 years after Yerevan, progress so far. I'm Luis Delgado, and I'm going to be the chair of this session and the session after the coffee break. I was a former project manager of a Erasmus Plus project, higher education reform in Spain, that ended last year, and one of the reforms that we would like to implement in Spain was on joint programs and other on student-centered learning. I was also a former Spanish representative in the Bologna follow-up group, so I participated in the preparation and elaboration of the European approach. Well, in this session, we are going to have 4 speakers. As in the previous session it was announced, we will have with us the Spanish representative that have some flight problems in Germany, I understand. And in addition, we will have 3 speakers that are, we are very lucky because the 3 of them were very active in the preparation of the European approach. And I still remember 3 years ago when Achim and Colin and also Tia would try to convince the Bologna expert, the national representative, on the beauties of the European approach. And I have to say that some of the national representatives were a bit skeptical about. So I think we are going to have an interesting debate here. The first speaker is going to be Colin Tack. Is a director of EQUAR, and of course all of you know that EQUAR is the acronym for the European Quality Assurance Register for Higher Education Secretariat. So Colin, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the organizers for the very kind invitation to present in that conference today. Thank you, Luis, for the very kind introduction, and it's a big pleasure to be here, and it's certainly not the first time that we have been discussing about the European approach. Before starting with talking about the progress so far, I just want to remind us all that the idea of a single accreditation of joint programs, as we have heard already before, is not new, even though already the European approach for quality assurance of joint programs is already 2 years old, but already back in 2012, the ministers in the European higher education area committed themselves to recognize quality assurance decisions on joint programs from registered agencies, so they already then had the idea in mind to enable single external quality assurance in the form of one single accreditation or evaluation procedure. We have, I think, heard enough about what was the idea behind the European approach, or the beauty of the European approach, as Luis put it. The idea was to get away from multiple fragmented reviews, to get away from having to reconcile all kinds of different national criteria, and to really move to using one single accreditation review or one single accreditation review based on a set of agreed standards, which is fundamentally based on the European infrastructure we already have, on the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance and the European qualifications framework. So in practice, that means if we look at institutions in different countries, there are 2 principal scenarios, of course. I think we should remind that also that there are countries in the European higher education area where external quality assurance normally only takes place at the level of the institution. So there's an institutional accreditation or institutional audit or institutional evaluation, whereas the higher education institutions are themselves fully responsible for the quality of their own study programs. In that case, of course, there shouldn't be, if all institutions cooperating up from those countries, there shouldn't be a big issue, because they have their own responsibility, and they may use the European approach in setting up their internal quality assurance, or they may find another solution. And as has been said before, of course, the difficulties start to get bigger once one or more partners in the consortium require some kind of external accreditation or evaluation at the level of the individual study program. And the rationale behind the European approach is in those cases that the consortium itself identifies one suitable ACRA-registered quality assurance agency to carry out one single accreditation review based on the agreed standards and the agreed procedure. So looking first of all at the possibility at national level in the legislative frameworks, I think what we have heard this morning, the examples from the 5 or 6 countries involved in the European Master on Strategic Border Management is very representative. So I'm not going to sell really anything new now, unfortunately, because you saw there are very different rules as to whether a single accreditation by the European approach could be recognized in the national framework or not, and that is the same all over Europe. If we look at, in general, at the European higher education area, as I said, there are 2 scenarios, and at the moment, at least most European countries require some sort of external program accreditation or evaluation at the level of the study program. So there are only 6 countries that in general only require institutional accreditation or audit, and there are 7 countries where the situation is mixed for different types of institutions. So all other countries, as soon as one of those is involved, there is probably a need for program accreditation. So what does it mean 2 years after year one? How much, to what extent is the European approach available in different European countries, and I mean practically available to use? First of all, there are unfortunately very few countries in Europe where the European approach can be used, let's say, unconditionally or without further obstacles by all higher education institutions. The largest group of those countries where that is so are actually those countries that do have only an institutional audit or institutional accreditation, and institutions have full own responsibility for their study programs. And you see those in blue, in this blue checkered color on the map. And there's a large group of countries where the European approach can be used either by some higher education institutions, but not by all, or where it can be used subject to further conditions or further obstacles. And we have heard some of them in the morning. So the decision might not be recognized automatically, or there might still be additional national criteria that have to be taken into account, and the European approach alone is not enough. So that's the picture we have 2 years after the RE1 Ministerial Summit. Of course, the question is: so is that particularly slow, or is that? And of course, on the one hand, it is slow. We would all have hoped that more countries would really have made the use of the European approach possible faster. And at the same time, I think we do have to acknowledge that at least in those 34 countries that do require accreditation of single study programs, usually making the European approach usable by higher education institutions does require a change of a law or a bylaw or some ministerial order or some other legal instrument. And that, of course, is not always easy, as we know, and it might take time, it might be subject to hesitation and so on and so forth. And we also have to, I think, be aware that a lot of those countries where the European approach can be used, at least fully or partially by higher education institutions, there are actually regulations that make that possible that predate the European approach. For instance, we heard some countries that have general regulations allowing the recognition of a quality assurance or accreditation decision from a registered agency, and those were already there before the European approach was adopted, so they could be used for the European approach also. On the other hand, I do want to say that or want to ask which other Bologna or European higher education area reform was implemented fully across Europe in 2 years. I think we have never seen that. We have just been discussing over lunch about persisting problems of non-implementation in the Bologna process, and that even some reforms that have been agreed a decade ago are sometimes not fully implemented in countries that were part of the Bologna process a decade ago. So I don't think the picture is so depressing. I'm not trying to say it's good, but at least I want to say it's not worse than a lot of other action lines in the Bologna process. And we have also heard before that the number of joint programs is in some countries it's very small. So having this this legal change might be something that's a very specific and small issue, and that doesn't warrant a change of the law by itself, and that's sort of on the to-do list for the next bigger reform. We have heard some examples about that. But I think one important point I want to make about the implementation in the national legal frameworks is that the sense of urgency that's given by the national stakeholders and also the demand from the higher education institutions in the country is a very important matter, because all ministers, all 48 now ministers, have signed up to the European approach and have made the promise to make external quality assurance and accreditation of joint programs easier by allowing the use of a single external quality assurance procedure. But I don't think it's going to happen if the demand doesn't come from the institutions across Europe and from the institutions in the country. I don't think it's enough that only institutions or actors at the European level keep reminding the national ministries of education of what they signed up to in year one. It will only really have effect, I think, if also the higher education institutions at the ground ask for being able to benefit from what ministers have actually promised in year one. So that leads me to the point of the practice, how much has the European approach actually been used. The interesting thing is I think most quality assurance agencies have said they are ready to use the European approach if they are asked to. In a lot of conferences and discussions, there's actually been quite a keen interest by higher education institutions, but still we have very few practical examples to date. I mean, it's less than a handful of practical examples. So what could be the reasons for that? I think three ones that I would like to mention. On the one hand, the number of reviews of joint programs in general is on the decline. If you look at the 44 agencies registered in ECWA, we ask them every year how many programs they have accredited or evaluated, and you see on that chart that the overall number of reviews they have carried out has slightly risen, but the number of joint programs they have reviewed in 2016 is less than half of what they reviewed in 2014. So there were only around 50 accreditations or evaluations of joint programs in total in 2016. Then I think it's also important to bear in mind that even though the map I showed before didn't look very promising, but it didn't look that bad, but still if you think of a consortium, of course it will only work if all your countries are blue. So if one country is gray, you already have a problem. So I think that's another reason why the real cases are coming slowly, because even if it's possible in 3 out of 4 consortium countries, it might not work in the end of the day because of one single country. And last but not least, I think for existing joint programs, it might sometimes be that the existing pragmatic solution that was used the last time might be easier to just do it again and not embark on the new European approach, but use the kind of combined accreditation or whatever solution was found for the last accreditation. So lastly, what does it mean for what could be done to boost progress in the future? As I said, I think really what is key is the demand from higher education institutions. I mean, without demand from higher education institutions, I don't think that legal frameworks and ministries will move much quicker than they do now. Having said that, I think especially the European policy level is still quite relevant, and it is important to go on monitoring the national implementation, which is going to happen as part of the Bologna process, monitoring of commitments, and it's important to keep the topic on the European agenda, not to let it slide or not to let forget what has been agreed in year one and what needs to be followed up. At the same time, I think the practical level is maybe more important now than in the discussions we had before ministers signing up to the European approach. So I think it is very important to have information dissemination and training, as has been said by many today, targeting both higher education institutions and quality assurance agencies. And of course it is important to showcase the few successful examples we have. Now I think that as ECHO, as a European register of agencies, our remit, of course, is to contribute to the monitoring of Bologna commitments to some extent, but of course it's not so much our remit to engage in things that are more within the realm of other stakeholder organizations. But I think I'm sure we will get to a good discussion later on or tomorrow who can really do what precise steps in taking things further. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Colin, for your overview of the progress so far, and the reason for the slow implementation, as you said. But I agree that it's not so depressing. So we are going ahead. Okay, the second speaker is going to be Tia Loukola. She is Director of our Institutional Development of the European University Agency, and probably he will give us some feedback from the institutional point of view from universities. Tia?
Thank you. Yes, it is my pleasure to be here providing you an European university perspective to the issue of European approach to quality assurance of joint programs. And I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation, which also made me think back and look also back at where we are at. I know the session is called 2 years after Yerevan, but I would like to take a little bit of step back and see how we got here. And before doing that, just to say a few words of the organization that I come from. It's a European University Association, which, as the kind of name tells you, we are a representative body of universities. We have about 850 university and National Rectors Conference members around the whole European higher education area, including this university as a member. And we represent the universities in the policy discussions, as Luis also said. We were part of the Bologna process, Bologna follow-up group discussions about this approach. And I thought I will tell you a little bit what we've learned from our work when it comes to the joint programs, and then say a few words about the need for this approach, and finish with the speculating about the impact of the approach. So, EUA has actually worked on joint programs back in the day, and Andres here, for instance, referred to a study that he did for us 15 years ago. And I was looking at that study when preparing this presentation, and I came to pretty much to the same conclusion as Andres himself. Not much has changed. Most of the things that we can see in the documents we wrote 15 years ago still seem to be valid, unfortunately. But we have prepared also guidelines for universities on internal quality assurance of joint programs, and I would underline the fact that the European approach for quality assurance of joint programs, the document adopted by the ministers, focuses on external quality assurance. And as Colin also referred to, it's basically targeted for the systems and agencies which operate on program accreditation. However, there is a mention that it can be used by other universities in other systems as well when developing their internal quality assurance for their joint programs. That being said, I think the guidelines that were prepared as part of the European Masters projects of ours are still valid and can be combined with the new ideology. We've done some surveys and we've continued to do some policy work. Why do I talk about this old studies is that we've seen the same results coming in. You may know that EUA does trend surveys every few years, and we actually have a new one coming up next year in preparation of the Paris Ministerial Conference. But the last time we did that was for the Bologna, for the Yerevan conference. And we asked about from the institutions that offer joint programs, at which level do they offer these joint programs? And the results were pretty much the same as what Mark presented from the Netherlands and Flanders in the morning. The joint programs are most common at master's level. The same way our example from this morning is at master's level. But one needs to also point out that there is 18% of our respondents said that they don't engage in this kind of activity at all. Then we asked, what is challenging when you engage in joint programs? And I'm not quite sure if the options are visible there, but it's not necessarily important to know all the percentages as such, but to say that there are a lot of challenges. Quality assurance process, 37% said that it's somewhat challenging, but there were other challenges that got a higher percentage and others that got the same percentage of respondents saying that this is challenging. The most challenging thing for universities seems to be the integration of these programs into the institution itself. They have a habit sometimes, these programs, to develop themselves apart a little bit. They are somebody's little project and they are not incorporated in the institutional strategy as such. So this is what we get from our members. There is an imbalanced mobility between partner institutions. There are language barriers. These programs mean additional work for staff. There are different fee structures in different countries. How do you navigate through that? There are countries where you are not allowed to charge fees for degree studies, whereas in other ones it's quite essential to be able to do that. There is recognition is a problem for 1/3. There are low student interest and legislative constraints. And sustainability of funding is one thing. So I wanted to show this just to tell that quality assurance and external quality assurance is a challenge in the program accreditation countries. But there are a lot of other challenges which are not directly related to the work of the quality assurance agencies. And we should remember that all these together are perhaps hampering the development of joint programs. So to be realist, even if we manage to implement the European approach of joint programs, it's not as if the sky would open and we are all in paradise. But that being said, EUA has welcomed the European approach because at least it would help us with some of the issues that the universities are tackling with. But actually, to be a little bit provocative here, one of the things we said when this was being developed is that there is actually one very simple way of tackling this issue. It would be that all the European countries would move to institutional level external quality assurance. Institutions would be made responsible for the development of their programs, for assuring that the programs match with all the expectations, and for reviewing that they continue to be fit for purpose. This way, the agencies wouldn't have to be doing external quality assurance at program level. Okay. This is a proposal that we made provocatively, knowing that this will not happen. No one is going to give up on program accreditation just because joint programs and so on. And there are political realities to be taken into account. But just to say that another option would be this. So, what are the pros and cons from a university perspective to the European approach? And I've written here in theory, because as Colin said, we really don't have many of these processes that would have been already finalized. So we haven't been really able to study and do a really representative study on, form a representative view on what are the pros and cons. But anyway, the expected, of course, the first thing is that this would be everyone living up to the commitment made in the Yerevan communique would, of course, mean for universities lighter bureaucracy. As we heard this morning, the bureaucracy can be quite horrendous, and I think the case we heard this morning is actually very much representative of what is really going on in those countries, in the universities that have to live with the program accreditation. So actually, if I was asked what's the reality 2 years after Yerevan, I would say, listen to the recordings of this morning, and this is probably the reality in many of the joint programs. So having the only one external quality assurance procedure and having one set of standards judged against would be a big step forward for universities when it comes to external quality assurance. Also, the possibility of choosing your quality assurance agency that is really fit for purpose for your program would be a step forward. What we really welcomed in the proposal, it's not a proposal anymore, it's supposed to be a reality in this approach, is that there was an emphasis on the jointness of the program, looking at the program offered by many universities as a whole, not looking at one part of the program in one country at a time, but trying to see how it makes one whole program which provides value added. Because this is sometimes what we forget at policy level when we try to advocate on behalf of having and more joint programs. We tend to forget that it is more work for institution in any case. But in order for it to be rewarding, there should be some kind of value added in it. It should bring something additional. It should be something more than a program offered by one single institution is. It's the same, what was explained today, that there was a rationale behind developing this case study that we heard about this morning. But then on the other hand, for us, one question is what will be the obligations for those higher education institutions that are in the self-accrediting countries, that are not normally part of the program accreditation? Will they be dragged into the program accreditation world through the European approach? And then again, one thing to be taken into account is that in some systems, and perhaps this will be discussed later on in the session after the coffee break, in some systems, having your program accredited by the quality assurance agency or evaluated by the quality assurance agency doesn't necessarily mean that it is recognized in the country. So in some systems, the recognition of qualifications is a separate process from the external quality assurance process. So that also needs to be taken into account. For instance, these examples of, master's thesis needs to be so and so many ECTS, and what can you call the award that is awarded in the end? Those are also issues that are not always in the remit of the quality assurance agency. Well, internally we know that the course coordination is challenging for universities, and there indeed different national legislations come into the picture. For instance, workloads, learning outcomes, they're defined differently. And they are not always defined by the quality assurance agency, but they are illegal, and therefore in order for your qualification to be recognized, you may need to take them into account anyhow, regardless of your agency. So yes, we don't know at this stage from the university perspective what really will be the impact of the European approach, because as Colin's statistics show, it's not really being used. There are very few countries that allow it, and it's very unlikely that you would be forming your consortium for your joint program based on this map. That you would see, okay, I will only choose colleagues from Finland, UK, and the Netherlands, and Switzerland to work with. That's not how the academic world works. It has a completely different rationale. Even if, Colin, this could be another way that universities could use your work if this was advertised more publicly. So time will tell if this really will have an impact. We hope it will. And we do need to make more advertisement of the approach. However, I am rather skeptical about Colin's remark that higher education institutions can be the drivers in this seed, because from our perspective, we should know that this approach exists. EUA, for its own part, has been doing some advocacy work explaining it exists, but then when you go to institutions and they say, well, can I use it? And you say, no, you cannot, because your country happens to come from your Spanish institution, so you cannot, because the ministry in Spain or all the regional ministries on top of it haven't made the decisions. There, one single university might feel a little bit discouraged of trying to make the difference in the country. Therefore, we would also argue from the university perspective that those who made the commitment to go home and implement the approach would take that commitment seriously and not just rely on the universities to be knocking on their door. So I think there needs to be a double approach. That being said, I do want to finish by, reminding all of us that what is essential is the internal quality assurance of these joint programs. We heard examples this morning that how this is being set up. The European Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance, the ESG, underline that the main responsibility for quality assurance lies within higher education institutions, and that applies to joint programs as well. The joint programs need to take their own internal quality assurance seriously and really demonstrate that this is not, as it was perceived perhaps 20 years ago or so, just a cheap way of providing qualifications for students, and it will be easier for students to get these qualifications. The joint programs should really invest in internal quality assurance and make sure that they can show their quality. And therefore, the guidelines we prepared previously, which really indicate that you need to start with the commitment, you need to have clear aims and concepts for your programs, go through the self-evaluations regularly in your program, and do a joint analysis in the consortium, and then implement improvements accordingly, is really crucial for universities. So they need to take their own responsibility. So for joint programs, from our perspective, the same principles apply as for regular provision. It all starts with the internal quality assurance, and the ESGs apply. We should aim with our quality assurance processes to enhance the quality of the provision we provide the students. But then at the same time, it is important to say that we need to provide insurance for stakeholders. One of the stakeholders being the student. So anyone who awards qualifications needs to make sure that the qualifications awarded are recognized in different countries, so that the students do not end up in a limbo. Another stakeholder, of course, from the university perspective, are the governments. And I'm asking myself if one of the reasons why not much progress has happened in 2 years is that the approach as it is written at the moment and copied in your respective folders is not detailed enough, or somehow doesn't provide the assurance to the governments that a program that goes through this will be of high quality. At the same time, many of the examples we heard this morning are not necessarily, of the national requirements for joint programs, are not necessarily linked to the quality. Because, for instance, I'm just taking an example here. The Estonian regulation that 20% of a program needs to be provided by a partner. I'm just asking, what's the link to the quality of the education the student gets? And it's just an example, and there are so many of them that you hear around Europe, but as it was mentioned in 2 presentations, it's on the top of my head at the moment as an example of national regulations that perhaps our politicians should reconsider on occasion. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tia, for giving us the perspective of the European universities, and a special thanks for your a bit provocative proposal. Move to institutional accreditation, so no need for quality agencies to assess the quality. Universities responsible of the quality of their own programs would fit very well with the theoretical autonomy of universities. And another point for debate, should the higher education institution become the drivers for the implementation, as calling, or is still at policy level? Because in theory we do have a European approach. Now we are going to pass to the third speaker, is Dr. Achim Hoppbach. Is a former president of the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education, and as I said before, he is probably the major responsible of the adoption of the European approach, first in the Bologna follow-up group, convincing the national representative of the 47 at that moment countries, and then in the adoption of the ministerial communique of the official adoption of the European approach. Achim?
Thank you, Luis, for this kind introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference about quality assurance of joint programs. A very interesting topic, a very important topic. It was only yesterday that I sent good news to Technical University of Vilnius, because the board of my agency, the Austrian Quality Assurance Agency, took a decision last week on the fulfillment of conditions that were imposed in a accreditation decision on a joint master program jointly organized by Technical University of Vilnius and Technical University of Braunschweig. So good news just a day before this conference. And in March, my agency took the first positive accreditation decision using the European approach. But I was not invited to talk about experience of my agency with joint programs or with a European approach, but give some views what ENQA, as the Association for Quality Assurance and the Association of Quality Assurance Agency, might do in order to make the European approach not only a paper thing but a living thing. I would like to do this by highlighting first one of the most important feature of this European approach, and you will understand why I highlight this approach when I go through this short talk. In the background report on the European approach, which was delivered to the ministers at the in conjunction with the European approach, we concluded the report talked about the difficulties in accreditation procedures with a couple of agencies and all this, and the difficulties in combining various sets of accreditation standards. And the conclusion was that the regulations for the procedures are not really a problem. Most of the procedures of ENQA reviewed and EQUA listed agencies are quite similar. Peer, site visit, report, and all this. What remained as an issue was we heard this in the morning. The national regulations, in addition to the very normal standards or criteria relating to the quality of a program. And the final conclusion was, with regard to the additional national criteria, it was concluded that the national criteria, should be removed when assessing joint programs in single quality assurance processes. Should be removed and should be replaced by a set of standards which directly emerge from what we have been working on in the Bologna process since many years now. The standards and guidelines, the Bologna tools, and the feature of jointness, of joint responsibility, of joint actions taken when offering a joint program. This is the core. And now where do we stand? In an article that I wrote last year in summer, or for an article which I published last year in summer, I did a little survey among ENQA members. And it was not surprising at all that almost all of the agencies, of the colleagues which I asked, told me, well, we are ready to use the European approach. We will have to model our procedures, but we are ready to use it. This was not a surprise at all. After all the years of experience with big projects of joint accreditation procedures, many agencies working together, and the members then felt a relief that life might be much easier. And we also heard that there's a lot potential for the universities, because life might be easier having only one procedure instead of many. But I also had to be aware of the fact that not too much had happened. And unfortunately, as we could hear this day several times, this is still true today. There are only maybe 4 or 5 procedures. And from my point of view, having had a close look at this in the last couple of years, there are, in the first place, 2 reasons, and these are legal issues we have to deal with. First thing, in many countries, legal changes are necessary. And the easiest way to deal with these legal problems, to make this very clear, is not trying to somehow incorporate the European approach or the largest part of the European approach into the national legislation. The easiest thing would be to allow for applying the European approach instead of applying the national regulations. A very easy step. Second problem is a problem where for all those systems where accreditation decisions are linked to legal consequences, where accreditation is at the same time the licensing. Because in most of the countries, this is a formal act based on administrative law and cannot simply be done by please allow me to put it like this, by anybody from any other country. This is the only issue, the only problem posed by the ministries, which I accept. But there's an easy way out. We need to find a way of nostrifying the decision, the outcome of a review done by some of our friends from a different country. If it is only a formal act. And these two issues are those we have to deal with in the future, or the most important issues. And that's the reason why maybe the name of this session should not be 2 years after Yerevan, but what are we going to do in the next couple of months till the conference in Paris. And one thing is very important, since we are talking about these legal issues. Tia highlighted it. These are two completely different worlds, whether there is compulsory program accreditation with legal consequences, or there's anything different from this. These problems only occur when there are these legal links to program accreditation. We have to keep this in mind. So what are we going to do? What should be done in the next couple of years and in the next couple of months? Four things, but I would like to focus on two of them. Promotion of the European approach, well, that's pretty clear. Education, analysis, and exchange. Promotion, well, ENQA will promote the European approach wherever it is possible, whenever it is possible. But it's not the most important thing we have to do. I think this is quite well known to all those who are directly involved, the agencies and ministries. Much more important is the educational part. And I would like to share my personal experience in Austria. I will not talk about any ministries from any other country. I will stick to Austria in order not to offend anybody. And the question I ask myself is, do the ministries really understand what they signed up to? Do the ministries realize that they have to waive the application of national regulation? I wonder if they really understand what they signed up to in Yerevan. And a statement, now what I wanted to say, a statement which I frequently heard in the last couple of months or in the last 2 years in several countries, I will not say that. A statement which I heard in a recent discussion in my ministry was, yes, certainly, you may apply the European approach. Of course, we signed up to it. But please make sure that all our national regulations are applied properly. And when I told them an interesting approach, but this doesn't work, because the core of the European approach is not to apply the national regulations, and then, oh, that's not possible. From my point of view, the most important thing is to make the dear colleagues from the ministries realize what that means. To make them realize that it's not about muddling through somehow, but to take a firm decision. We signed up to this approach, and now we will do it. Next thing, analysis. It is on the agenda that ENQA, together with the European Consortium for Accreditation and ECRA, the register, will do an analysis next year in spring, maybe through another survey among the 8 agencies, and they will organize an event next year in spring. And I think it is very important to have this analysis and this conference, whatever it might be, right when we have the first draft of the stock-taking process report, so we know what has been done at national level, and when we have the first experience of maybe then 6, 7, 8 reviews, and when it's still time to put the outcome of this analysis on the political agenda of the Bologna follow-up group before the next ministerial meeting. What is very important now, from my point of view, the next steps to be taken jointly by the stakeholders is not to run more projects, not to have more, showcases. I think what is important now is to make a clear statement to the ministers that there is a clear decision to use this approach instead of what is usually to be used, all the national criteria. If we will not manage to get this message through, I am quite concerned that in 5 years' time we will have a conference like this with brilliant and interesting comprehensive analysis like this morning, which will be extremely frustrating for all of us, which was the case this morning. This analysis we had at an ENQA seminar in Vienna in 2011, when ENQA started its initiative, which then led to the European approach. And in 2011, 6 years ago, we found out that the analysis we presented was, as it was mentioned today, the same as in all the papers by EUA, by ENQA, by ECA since 2002. We are not in the situation to analyze. We are not in the situation to do pilots. We are in the situation to talk about political will. This is on the agenda, and all the stakeholders should play their role in discussing with ministers about political will, about the steps necessary to be taken to make this commitment of Yerevan a living new step of the Bologna process, and a new step in the development of the European higher education area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Achim, for your presentation and for pointing us the real important aspect, this one on the legal consequences of accreditation in some countries, or the very interesting point on the real understanding of the ministry when they endorsed in Yerevan 2 years ago the European approach. and that the European approach is here to replace the national regulation, so avoiding this statement, okay, we approve this, but while complying with national requirements, that is very often heard. Okay, now we pass to the last speaker, last but of course not least, is Ms. Sandra Marcos from the Regional Quality Agency of Castilla-León. And just to remind you that University of Salamanca, that is partner in Frontex, the project presented this morning, is within this region of Castilla-León. Sandra, the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to apologize for the delay coming to the conference, and to thank the organizers to allow me to share with you my presentation, and of course for inviting the Quality Assurance Agency of Castilla y León, Axusil, from which I come from. I would like to explain you how is the situation about the accreditation of joint programs in the Spanish context, and in particular in Castilla y León, in the region which I come from. I will talk to you about the Spanish regulation, the regional situation, our vision about the European approach in relation with the Spanish regulation. Of course, my colleagues have already highlighted some issues about legislation, regulations, bureaucracy, control, that I think that are in place in my country. So I will explain you, and then some conclusions. In Spain, we have a clear regulation for the accreditation, program accreditation. We have a Royal Decree 1393, which was issued in 2007, and it has had several modifications so far. This decree was established for the governing of the planning of official education. This decree established that it's compulsory in Spain that all programs must apply for accreditation. So the Spanish evaluation system is quite controlled, actually. If a university wants to offer a new study program, a new official study program, this program should apply for the initial accreditation. Once the program is already accredited, it can run in the university, and then if the program wants to change or make some changes, should apply again for a modification to the government. Then, after between 4 or 8 years, depending on the program, they should apply for the renewal of the program accreditation. And in between, since the initial accreditation to the renewal of the accreditation, the agencies monitor the programs. So it's really control. The initial accreditation, for the initial accreditation, the universities must apply for recognition of a program as official to the Spanish University Council. Then the program is evaluated by an accredited agency. When I say accredited agency, it means that it must be an agency that is registered in ECAR. Otherwise, the agencies cannot carry out the evaluations. Then, if the result of the evaluation is positive, the program is authorized by the autonomous region, in my case, in the case of Castilla y León. And then the Spanish government recognizes the program as official, and it's entered in the register of universities, centers, and programs. It's called RUCT in Spain. And then we publish the study program, and then the program can be offered as official in the university. All the agencies must follow the same criteria to accredit the program. It means that the criteria are also in the royal decree, are established in the legislation, in the regulation. For the modifications of programs, again, the university should apply for modifications to the Spanish University Council. Then the modification is evaluated, again, by an accredited agency. Not all the modifications should be asked to the Spanish University Council, only those that are big changes of the program. Then once the program is already evaluated, the autonomous region, in the case of Castilla y León, must authorize, again, the modification. Once this is already done, the agency communicates the assessment result to the government, and then the modifications are entered in the register, in the RUCT. For renewal of the accreditation, the program accreditation, again, the university must renew the accreditation, must apply to the autonomous region. The programs in Spain, the renewal of the accreditation in Spain are after 4 years, after 4 years. If it's a master's degree, 6 years if it's a bachelor's degree, if the bachelor has 240 ECTS, if it's 300 ECTS, it must be after 7 years, and if it's 360 ECTS, it must be after 8 years. Then once the university has applied to the autonomous region, then the program is evaluated by the agency, and then the agency communicates the assessment result, and then the Spanish University Council decides, and the modification of the renewal are entered in the register again. Regarding as regards the joint program, the royal decree says that the joint programs is understood as one study program designed by 2 or more higher education institutions, but Spanish or foreign institutions that have signed a collaboration agreement and that they have submitted a single application for initial accreditation. It means that in Spain, joint programs are can be between universities of the countries and between universities of the countries or foreign universities or higher education institutions. And then the diploma awarded is issued as, for instance, Master in Arts by University A, B, and C. The regulation also established some requirements for joint programs. Together with the study programs, the institution, the university should there should be an agreement between the institution, and in any case, the requirements that they should comply with are the same of any other study program. This agreement should include which institution will be responsible for custody the custody of student records, awarding and who award and register the degree in the system, and also the procedure for the modification and for extinguishing the study program. In any case, if a foreign higher education institution is involved in the joint program, they should accredit that this institution is officially recognized by a competent authority. And in any case, the program of the university, the Spanish university, should apply for the initial accreditation in our country. In Castilla y León, in my autonomous region, we also Besides to fulfill with national regulation, we should also comply with the regional regulation. So there is a decree regulating official university degrees in Castilla y León for bachelor and masters, in which is established that study programs from universities of Castilla y León should be authorized by the regional minister, and also the modifications of any modification should be also authorized by the regional minister. In the case of joint programs, the modifications, if there is any modification in the collaborating agreement, they should be, the regional ministers must be informed about it, and the university also should provide an economic report to the regional government for assess the effects in the economics effects, if so. In Castilla y León, there are 553 programs, bachelor, master's, and PhD. 64 of them are joint programs, 37 of which are coordinated by universities of Castilla y León, and of these 37 programs, 9 involve foreign higher education institutions, 8 coordinated by the University of Castilla y León, and 1 is the Frontex. So, and 27 are involved universities of Castilla y León, but not the universities of the region are coordinating the programs. So, we have not many experience about joint programs, as all of them are coordinated by universities of our region, so they apply for the initial accreditation, and they fulfill with the criteria of the decree. And in any case, all of them are running since 2013, so are before the European approach. And I would like to give you our view about the European approach and the Spanish regulation. We have program accreditation. We are shifting now in Spain to the institutional accreditation, but there is still a long way to go in this sense. And in any case, in Spain, for the institutional accreditation, to get the institution or to apply for the institutional accreditation is established in the regulation that the universities or the centers must have at least the 50% of their programs already accredited by the program accreditation. And also they have to have a positive evaluation of their internal quality assurance system. So there are some also some drawbacks, maybe, in this sense. As taking into account the ESG, it's not a problem. The European approach, the standards of the European approach are, of course, in line with the ESG. So the accredited agencies in Spain are, of course, in line with the ESG. So there is not many differences between the standards that the European approach propose and the standards that the Spanish agencies use for the initial accreditation. Of course, there are some legal restrictions, as in a country. I think that the most important thing is the bureaucracy and the control that we have in our system. The Spanish system did not allow to recognize the automatic recognition of the evaluation, but the universities in Spain should apply again for the accreditation to the Spanish government, and the Spanish government must decide about the accreditation in the end. Another question that arises to me when reading the European approach is that in Spain, the programs are of 240 ECTS. There is not a program so far of 180 ECTS. So it could be a problem. And in Castilla y León, in my region, there is a special situation, and there is an agreement that no bachelor's or no degrees of 180 ECTS can be offered so far. And another drawback is the periodicity of the accreditation. As I told you before, the European approach says that the renewal of the accreditation is every 6 years, and in Spain, the regulation says the master must be renewal their accreditation before 4 years. So it could be a drawback again. And also the specific criteria, I told you, is not a problem because the criteria are nearly the same, but in Spain we have a system, a database, in which the universities must apply for the accreditation, and they should present their study programs with the same structure of the database of the government. So in this sense, there can be some problems as well. And finally, the modifications, the modification procedure in Spain, if the modification is significant, should be again authorized by the government. The regional government, in my case, and the national government. So double authorization. So the conclusion, my conclusion, is that more work is needed in Spain. We need to work. It's a long way, and there is a legal void as regards the joint programs. We need to work more about how to accept the evaluations issued by other institutions following the European approach. And that the European approach, I think, is a good framework to work with. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marta, for your explanation, and a special thanks personally from me, because after many years, after your explanation, I think that I will be able to understand the Spanish system. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to the 4 speakers. They have been very concise, so we have been able to save some time. And then, if the organizer allow me, I would like to pass the floor to the audience if there is any need of clarification or hot question. Of course, you know that tomorrow, the second day, will be devoted to discussion, but I think that we have heard during this session some important messages, and maybe some of you have some questions for clarification or for further explanation. So please feel free to address any question to any of the speakers and even to the chair. Use the microphone.
Okay. Jürgen Petersen from ECA. Just a small question to Sandra. What is the modification procedure you had in your last slide, or one of the last slides?
Yeah, this procedure is when the institution wants to change the study programs once it has already accredited. For instance, the number of students, they should apply for it to the agency, to the government, and then the agency should evaluate if this change is okay or not.
Is there kind of a threshold, or, I mean, what type of changes, especially when you look at the joint program, I mean, and you look, of course, to internal quality management and development, you will always, hopefully you will have some changes, and when is the threshold, when do you have to apply it to the ministry, or to the agency?
Yeah, we are now developing a document about what kind of modification must be applied to the government and what others not. But if the modification involves to some extent a change in the aim of the program, they should apply for it. In the study program, for instance, if one study program wants to change from to online program, they should be evaluated by the agency in order to see if the program fulfilled with the criteria. Or, for instance, with the number of students, if they have enough, if they want to increase the number of students, if they have enough teaching staff.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, there.
Christina Rozsner from Hungary, from the Hungarian Accreditation Committee and several other international organizations over the years. And I have to say, I don't even know how to put it. I'm very distraught. I've been in quality assurance for 25 years or so, and this joint program issue was sort of in the back of my mind, but it was not one of the primary things I was dealing with. And now I've been plunged into this question, which is a huge question, and which is another question that we have to deal with also with our government and our legislation, which hasn't considered it so far. And I'm sure a lot of other countries, or I know from the presentations, a lot of other countries are faced with that as well. And there are so many things. I think the only way we could really work is to throw away everything and start from scratch. We had quality assurance starting in the 1990s. We had the European, what was it called, this report that came out from ENCA, I think, at the time, about all the common denominators, the 4 common denominators which we've been working in ever since in quality assurance. And everything seemed fine and everybody was going along the same track. And now everybody's going in so many different directions and so many little details that are not the same. What I want to get to is the only thing that seems to me to have really worked and to have had enough leverage are the European standards and guidelines. That is what really got countries to get different countries' approaches together. That is what had leverage on the governments to be a member of ENCA, be registered in ECHAR. This is what really has worked. So I'm just thinking this is something that we should carry on from this perspective. What has leverage? What can we do that will get us together to have a common language again? Because, I mean, we come together, I know many of you, we know each other, we go in the same circles, we talk, as Achim said, we will meet in 5 years, talk again, but what is it that really works? I think the ESG is something that has really worked. Thank you.
Okay.
If I may, I mean, I also want to say I couldn't agree more with Achim that there is a need for a political push, and that's what I wanted to say. I didn't want to say before it's all on the universities, but I think we need to push from all different directions. But I think what would be a slippery slope is to say we need a more common language, or we need more precise standards, because I mean, maybe ministers didn't want to remember what they agreed upon in year 1, but I think in year 1 everyone knew that they agreed on saying, okay, these are the standards, and they accepted that these standards are sufficient for trusting each other. So it would be very strange to come later and say, okay, now the standards are not robust enough, or we need more common standards, we need more detailed standards, because in year 1 everyone said this is enough to trust each other, and I think the same applies to the ESG. When the ESG were revised, we had lots of discussions also including three out of us here, how much of a common language do we have, and what is the common language we can all agree upon, and what is the common language that we think is enough to agree upon as a common substance to trust each other. So we cannot say on one day, okay, if you stay within this framework, it's enough to trust each other, and at the next day say, oh, but it's not enough, we need to be more, we need to expect more commonality to trust each other. I think that would be also in contradiction. So I think we have to be quite firm in saying, okay, ministers, you said the ESG, this is your common basis for trust, this is your common framework, you must be willing to trust everyone who operates on that basis, and you cannot say, yeah, but operating on the basis we all agreed upon is not enough. So I think it would be dangerous to say we need more standards.
Okay, we still have time for one or two quick questions. Are there any? Or comments? Or yeah.
Thank you. There is a thing that keeps bugging me since the morning, because I missed to tell you a very important and very significant development that happened. Colin actually gave me the opportunity to come back to this when you said at some point that sometimes the challenges, the differences are, or well, the restrictions arising from the national regulations are too specific matters, so that a separate change of law would occur. And I have to say that we lived to see the remarkable example of Latvia, and speaking again about the political push and so on, where, well, the national legislation was not very favorable in a particular aspect, this 300 ECTS. And through a fantastic collaboration between Ministry of Internal Security, the State Border Guard of Latvia, and Rezekne Academy of Technology, they managed to actually issue a separate decree, right? A separate decree for this particular joint degree, of course bringing up the interests coming from the, well, European commitments to, in terms of border security and Schengen area. So probably this is very specific and very particular, but it's quite a remarkable achievement where actors from different ministries sat together and fought to achieve this for a good cause. So we are very grateful to the Latvian partners for this. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's a good example of where you can, by advocating, make a difference. But then again, if all the programs in Europe have to do the same thing, that becomes a bit burdensome. So that's not ideal. But I wanted to come back to Christina's comment that the ESG has worked, and it seems to be the one. But I think you already pointed out to at least one of the key factors. With the ESG, after it was adopted, there were structures and procedures developed that, in a way, actively monitor and push for the implementation and for taking it seriously. We have the ECAR that was established, and ENQA right away adopted the ESG as their membership criteria for agencies. So there was kind of pressure somebody is looking at whether we take this seriously. But then another reason why the ESG probably is easier to swallow in a way or accept is that it does provide leeway. It does allow the national interpretations and the little quirks here and there where national priorities can come into the picture, whereas, as Achim said, in principle, the European approach says you will not have these national priorities anymore. You're just following the European approach and the standards that are not there. You are not adding things here and there. So these are probably the two differences that there are in the two documents. Just thought.
Achim, please be concise. Huh?
One very interesting observation. What is what has become extremely important in the European higher education area is international or European recognition. The universities seek for international recognition, whatever that might be. The quality assurance agencies and the national systems have to comply with the standards and guidelines in order to be recognized at European level, and so on, and so on, and so on. And what is very funny, and international means very often at some kind of higher level. We all know this discussion. We use international peers in our reviews, what that means. And very interesting, or I should say funny, that when it comes to the European approach, it's the other way around. Then all of a sudden, the ministries see a danger or a risk that the programs might get around the really important standards and criteria, such as, should it be the Master of Arts or the Master of Engineering? Well, very important question. This is a very funny thing that all of a sudden this recognition at European level, this international notion, is not important anymore. And I think we should talk about this also to the ministers.
Okay, thank you very much. And we are now over time, but I will take the privilege of the chair to reply to the somehow provocative question by Tia, move to institutional accreditation. Do you think that universities are prepared for this? I mean that the internal quality assurance system of all universities in Europe in general allow to pass them this responsibility? You don't have to reply in public. We can continue discussion during the coffee break. But if you like,
if you give me the floor, I will reply. Of course, not every single university in Europe is right away ready for that. However, I think it is important, and this is what my organization has been trying to do in the past 20 years. It's important to advocate that we work on the capacity building of the universities. In the long run, that needs to be the goal, that the universities are capable of really taking up this responsibility. And we have seen that many universities have worked on this, so progress has been made.
okay, thank you very much. Now we go to the coffee, and we reconvene here for the second part of the plenary session at 4:15. Okay? Okay.